This is a presentation of BSRN, Box Studios Radio Network. The Power Play Post Show is on the air, covering minor league hockey since 2003, and now covering the Binghamton Black Bears with news, reactions, and in-depth interviews only heard here. And now from the Box Studios in Kirkwood, New York, here is your host of the Power Play Post Show, Bob Howard.
And hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Power Play Post Show. This is the show for April 22nd, 2025. This is season 14, episode number 61. And more importantly, this is episode number 500 in the long-running podcast that is the Power Play Post Show. Hello, everyone. I am Bob Howard. Thank you very much for tuning in. And we've got a very special show for you tonight. And I'm very excited about recording this episode, because this episode is going to seem very similar to the first episode of the Power Play Post Show, which happened way back in November of 2004. And the guest that I have with me right now was that person who was with me back in November of 2004. He is Grady Whittenburg. He is the voice of the Cornell Big Red men's and women's hockey team, and of course the former Binghamton Senators broadcaster extraordinaire. Grady, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for doing this with me. It's 500th episode, and I couldn't imagine of any other way of doing it by having you here on the show with me.
It's been 21 years since you started this, huh? That's hard to imagine. Yeah. And I know there was a little bit of a respite a short time ago before you jumped back in and continued what has been a very informational resource for fans, no matter the level of hockey, but whatever league it has been, it's been very in-depth, and kudos to you for continuing on and displaying your passion and providing fans with such information and things that they just don't get nowadays, particularly in the Binghamton area. I know you kind of do it on a league-wide basis, but you really focus now on the Binghamton Black Bears, and I know a lot of people out there are thankful for what you do. They were thankful when you were a bit of a pioneer back in 2004, 21 long years ago, when you started this up, and I was with you for that first ride. And here we are, 500 shows later. Though you've been a part of all 500, I was a part of a pretty good segment, but 500, I'm not even close to that. Yeah. But congratulations on your journey so far, and I appreciate you having me here for such a special benchmark in your broadcast career.
Well, thank you very much. And yeah, you were on every single episode of the show for the most part for the first 3 seasons, and then you went to kind of like that reoccurring guest role, which I did with a lot of different broadcasters, and it was such a great moment. But the first episode was just you and I over the phone, kind of like we're doing now, but we're recording it a little bit differently. And we just literally started talking. And matter of fact, I think that one of the first things that we actually talked about on air was about how we both have the face for radio versus being on TV and doing TV games, which eventually in 2012, when we did some together, I absolutely despised those games just for the simple fact that I think I was sweating more during that 35-second to 45-second spot where we actually had to be on TV than anything else.
I think it takes a special breed of broadcaster to really embrace the TV side and fully agree with you on the faces made for radio aspect of it. But you do what you got to do. And with my work now on ESPN Plus with Cornell University for the men's and women's hockey programs, my color partner, most broadcasts, is Tim Vanini, a former Cornell defender. He graduated in the class of 1991, which he was part of the first class that I called Cornell radio games on that season. That was my first kind of big-time gig in my mind after doing a lot of local high school football stuff with WEBO and Owego. But calling Tim's senior season was my first experience on a bigger scale and my first hockey experience. But he's my color man now here in 2025, and he has been for the past couple of years. And he always wants to be on TV. Are we going to do the stand-up? Are we going to be on camera? I'm like, Tim, just settle down. Just do the color man's job. Just settle down. And trust me, he's got a face made for radio as well. So I would say that to his face. I probably have said it to his face. But yeah, it takes a special sort to want to do that. I am not that special. I enjoy radio, but I do the video side now on ESPN Plus because I still like keeping my toes in the broadcast water. But I have a great time doing the games. But I don't need to be on camera. But I remember those times when you and I were doing those on, I don't think it was Spectrum yet. I think it was probably still Time Warner Cable, or maybe it had just switched over. But a lot of fun back then, and how this all began. And that was just, if it was November of 2004, that would be my second season, the team's second season as far as the Binghamton Senators. And they came out that great first year. They went all the way to the conference finals before falling to the Hamilton Bulldogs, and they were 3 wins away from making the Calder Cup finals in their very first season. Didn't work out, but what a relaunch of the American Hockey League in Binghamton back then. You jump on board with what I don't even know if the word podcast existed back in 2004, but it was an online radio show, and you jumped in, and it became a nice little resource that complemented what back then was pretty good local media coverage, both TV and radio. And back in the day, a name I know you'll remember, Scott Lauber with the Press and Sun.
Yep.
He was the beat writer for the Binghamton Senators, the very first one, and it was for a small market, it was a pretty good media presence. You added what you provided to that. Sadly, nowadays, what you do is kind of all that there is in Binghamton from the feel I get. But it's been a long ride for you. But those days in the Binghamton Senators and starting it off, it was a lot of fun helping you out and providing some content along the way.
I used to have a lot of conversations with Scott Lauber, and he's great. He knows his baseball. He knows his hockey really well. He's working down in Philadelphia covering the Phillies, and just an amazing person. And I remember him. I remember saying to him multiple times, "I'll never be a writer. I'm just going to talk about hockey. I'm never going to write." And now in the Facebook group, I literally write a game day matchup, and then I write the game day thread, which is basically just chronicling what happens in the game, and then I write the perspective the next day about the game, writing more than I ever used to when I thought, okay, I'm just going to do radio, I'm just going to broadcast, I'm just going to talk about the games. And now I've started to write about the games, and I do that because, Grady, newsprint media is really just going away, and it's kind of crazy. I'm sure there's still print media covering Cornell, but media has just changed a lot in the last 21 years.
Yeah, and the print media that covers Cornell is the Cornell Daily Sun. The Ithaca Journal used to have a beat writer that would be at every home game and most every major home sporting event, and it just doesn't exist anymore. But that said, the advent of the internet was around back when you started this, obviously, because that's where people could access it online, the online radio show. But just the various channels of social media now, it has made it maybe a little bit easier to reach the fans. It doesn't cost. You don't have to pay for a newspaper. Not that back in the day that cost a lot. Funny you bring up newspapers and covering teams. I was listening to one of my sports podcasts today, and one of the guests was talking about he's in the D.C. area, and he said he finally gave up. He's about my age. He's his early 60s, maybe mid-60s, down in Washington, D.C., and he loved the fact that you get the morning paper, and you thumb through it, and you have the information right in front of you. Now, the internet gives you instantaneous access, but for people of a certain age, that was the way to get your information. I remember as a kid growing up, and I was a big baseball person before I became a hockey guy, and I couldn't wait to just pore over the box scores every morning or every afternoon when there was an afternoon paper, and then you had the Press and Sun Bulletin in the morning, and it was just something I looked forward to. He said he finally gave up his subscription because it just wasn't worth it. They called him up, tried to retain him. For a hard copy of the Washington Post, it was going to cost him close to $600 a year. And that they tried to position it as what a great deal you're getting because the real cost was over $1,000. And he finally agreed to, well, I'll buy your online offering. And I think that was something that he agreed to for $179. So things have changed so much from the infancy of when you and I were young, and it was just local TV stations and the local newspaper into the internet exploding as you and I kind of went into, it's not just into adulthood, because I would probably term that mid to late 80s when I got out of high school. Yeah. I think you're kind of in the same window of time. And then
a couple of years later.
Yeah, the 1990s was when, the late 1990s, I'd say, is probably when the internet kind of started gaining a little bit more widespread speed, and people had a little bit easier access to it, the old AOL discs and things like that were prevalent back then. But it's a whole new world given how it was back when you and I first hooked up over Binghamton Senators hockey.
Well, again, Grady, in the beginning, when I started doing online radio shows in 99, late 99, going into the 2000s, and I was talking about pro wrestling, and I did those types of shows, there wasn't even streaming at that point. It really came down to you were downloading the file onto your computer and then listening to it through a media player. And then right around 2004, when I started the Power Play Post Show, that's when you were able to start streaming from the server that the podcast was hosted on. But, it wasn't until like June or July of 2004 that the word podcast came out. And I already did like 150 shows about pro wrestling before that, and interviewed people and had guests. And what was amazing was the negative connotation of internet media at that point was really bad. And it really was a lot of hard work by a few hockey writers and some baseball writers, and then probably myself and a couple other people that were trying to do podcasts and make them popular, because it took a few years before, even with you on the show on a regular basis, and Bob McGilligan gave me my first credential to come up to a Syracuse Crunch game and to be able to interview people in the post-game scrums afterwards. It took a little while for people to go, oh, okay, this guy is doing something that's actually good for the American Hockey League, good for the fans.
Yeah, and I think it was something new, and I think it was probably on the other end a sorting out process. Is this guy really doing something? Is it a benefit, the exposure benefiting the league, or at least the team that he's covering, or the teams in his general area, or is it just somebody looking to get a pass? I think there were those people out there. I'm pretty sure there's still those people out there today, some 21 years later since you got your first pass in Syracuse, or whenever that exactly happened. I forget when you said if that was that first year or not, but within the same probably window of 2 or 3 years.
I think it was either the second or the third year that Bob was just willing to do it. He said, yeah, come on up and do it. And I don't know if you kind of like put in a good word for me. If you did, thank you very much. But because I know you and Bob are good friends. But it was a shock. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I can do this. And, that's when I met Jim Sorosi for the first time. And what a great relationship that was with Jim, because if I needed anything from Syracuse, he was an easy, reach to, call out to. But it was a great experience for me.
Well, sure. And again, I think it was just a weeding out process, seeing who is going to be on the legit side of things, what they're doing with their access, what they're producing. And you've certainly, you took the ball and ran with it. I think that's safe to say. And you've been such a great resource ever since those fledgling years back in the early 2000s.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing. Grady, you started off really, you kind of talked about it already with Cornell, and you've come full circle and you're doing Cornell again. But even before you did Cornell, I want you to tell the fans again about the stories about you coming to the arena here in Binghamton and practicing and trying to get ready, and how that worked out, and which broadcaster that was with again, because to me, it's just amazing that, your connection now with Cornell hockey, and there's something really special about that, because Cornell is a D1 school that everybody absolutely knows who they are. They know the student section and how rowdy they can be. But you started off at the arena, getting ready for your broadcasting career.
Yeah, my dad had season tickets through his business when hockey I don't know if it was when it first came to Binghamton with the Broom Dusters or maybe a year or two after, because the tickets were so in demand that first couple of years, and used to pack the old barn there with the first league, the North American Hockey League that was in town. But it was still the Dusters. I want to say maybe when it transitioned into the AHL in 77, 78. It's kind of fuzzy. I've forgotten more than I remember nowadays at these golden years that I'm now enjoying up here in Ithaca with Cornell hockey. But going to the games and kind of got into it with my dad. Further down the road, I had done some high school work with WEBO in Owego, but I didn't have any hockey stuff, and I kind of got the hockey bug just from having watched games, going to them, being an involved fan. I love getting into the games and goals being scored, had my cowbell. I was one of those guys. I had the cowbell. Some people have a great disdain for those folks, but I had a great time, and I wanted to be able to have something to try and get my foot in the door hockey broadcast-wise. I had done high school football, but that's really it's obviously a totally different sport. It's a different pace. So I contacted, and I forget who the person was with the Binghamton Whalers at the time. That was the team in town. I want to say it's Bob Arablo, who I know he's worked with a couple of different hockey teams in the ECHL down in Florida, and I think he resides in Florida down there for a good number of years now after his involvement, getting a couple of different teams started in the ECHL down in the Sunshine State. But he gave me the opportunity. I think it was when Mark Shalansky was hired, and I forget who was the radio voice before him. But I was kind of maybe angling, hey, could I work with Mark, maybe be a color guy, this and that. And I had no idea. I had zero experience. My only hockey experience was going and watching games. I lived out in the country. We didn't have cable TV. I never got to see hockey on TV. So, I had zero qualifications, but I still made my pitch. And Mark didn't want to work with a color guy, which was fine, especially one that he didn't know, had no hockey background, but he was enthusiastic. But, yeah, that wasn't going to cut it from my end. Enthusiasm on a resume doesn't mean a whole lot. But Bob said, I'll tell you what. We'll have a space in the press box for you when it's, not a crowded night. There's going to be some nights where we can't accommodate you. But if you want to come up, you want to practice, you want to get some reps in and kind of learn what it takes to be a broadcaster, come on up. And I bought myself a mixer very similar to what I have sitting on my desk here in front of me in my home studio, the old Shure. This is an M267. Back in the day, it was a Shure 67. And a tape deck, and bought myself a Shure headset, and just began calling games and having a blast. And now I remember the voice. I think it was Roger Neal. He transitioned out of calling hockey games to kind of be really a full-time news director at WNBF in Binghamton. So that's what it was. And I loved Roger. I loved listening to him. And as I began doing my own mock broadcast, I would run into Roger every so often and just tell him how much he was my idol. He was the guy. He was my earliest influence in my hockey broadcast career because he was the guy I always listened to. And making those tapes, I think I cranked out probably 150 game tapes over 2 years or so up in the press box, and began what everybody does now on computer, just taking the best, splicing it together, making a demo reel. I sent them out to every hockey team under the sun, even NHL teams. And you usually get the form letter back. Thank you so much. We really enjoyed it, blah, blah, blah. You can tell it was a secretary writing the letter. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but I got more than a form letter from somebody with the San Jose Sharks back in the day. And I forget exactly when they came into the NHL. So this may have been a little bit further down the line. And I think maybe by that point I had some Cornell experience under my belt of actual live radio broadcasting of hockey games, but sent a very nice letter back, how much they enjoyed it. They weren't hiring anybody right now. In fact, they've had the same voice since their inception, Dan Ruzanowski, who used to pass through town with the New Haven Nighthawks back in the 90s. Yeah. And he's been there. He's been their only radio broadcaster, and he continues on to this very day. But their director of broadcasting said, we don't have any openings, but boy, you really jumped off the tape deck, if you will, at us, and very impressed. And we feel that you might have a future somewhere down the line, and if we can ever help, just let us know. So that was just that little nugget that I haven't shared that story a whole lot, if ever. That kind of it gives you some confidence. It gives you that energy to keep pushing through, to keep pursuing what you want to do, pursue that next level. And with that, I guess rewinding, because by that time I'm pretty sure I did have that Cornell job and all those practice tapes, some 150 games worth. That got me in the door at Cornell, and I was there for 13 years to kind of kick things off. It's been several long stretches of my broadcast career. I haven't bounced around a whole lot like some guys do, and I've been very blessed with that. Everything's pretty much been based here in the upstate central New York area, with a little detour down to D.C. for 23 lifetime calls in the NHL, but it's been a blast, and it really started from humble beginnings and just wanting to make something happen, and I'm very proud. It doesn't happen without some connections along the way, but that's part of building relationships, just like you did. I maybe knew your name, I knew of you, but you reach out, you sit down, you talk with somebody, and you find some common ground, and that relationship grows stronger and stronger and stronger, and then it helps you step up the ladder to do some different things, or open different doors, get a press pass with Syracuse and wherever else maybe, do some games on the air with me, both radio and TV. And it's like many things in life. It's a business about relationships. You put your nose to the grindstone early on, and you'll get results if you have a little bit of talent and a little bit of motivation and a little bit of gumption. And I look and wish with the 23 games of NHL experience I have had the pleasure of experiencing, I certainly would love to have had a long NHL broadcasting career, but to be honest with you, Bob, I wouldn't trade 1 second of any night on the air that I've had, be it college, AHL, ECHL, NHL. I've enjoyed every minute so thoroughly because it's hockey. It's awesome, man. I would not trade any aspect of my life for anything. I've enjoyed every step of the way.
Well, can I throw one complaint to you that I think I've mentioned to you once before, but I just want to bring it up one more time. You used to fool fans on the radio all the time. So for fans who don't know Grady that well, and some of the fans who do know, you guys will understand this. This guy gets hyped up for every goal that he calls. Even if it's for the other team, there's an inflection in his voice that just keeps going up, even though it was somebody from the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins that was scoring the goal. And it's the only complaint I've ever heard about you. The flow of the game is beautiful. You can sit there and close your eyes while at the rink and still have the headset on and know exactly where they are in the rink, where the puck is. Beautiful. But then all of a sudden, Tom Kostopoulos is going to score a goal against Ray Emery, and son of a gun, Grady Whittenburg, his voice is like so into it. Was that always that way, where even when it was the opposing team's goal scorer scoring a goal, you just this excitement just came through?
It's hockey, Bob. That's my defense. But that's my first line defense. My second line defense is, and you're not the only one to have pointed this out. It hasn't been a ton of people, but it's been enough, because when people are listening to a game on the radio or on their computer, however it's done nowadays, I would say more so probably on a phone through a smart speaker and everything like that. They're not concentrating on the game, but they may have it on in the background. And when they hear excitement, they just assume it's for their team if they're listening to their broadcaster. But
this is where you fool them.
You have to listen a little bit more closely. I see their side of the story, but my defense and my explanation is, you can always tell when it's a Binghamton goal. There's more juice on that call. That's always been my defense. It's hockey. I get excited. How can you not? And I know I've used this defense, if not with you, but with other people. Back in the day, if I'm down in Wilkes-Barre, you use that as an example, they were selling out 144 straight games. How can I just say, shot, score? And you got the horn blasting in the background, 8,413 fans going nuts down there, and I'm downplaying it. Some broadcasters do that, And
Yeah.
so funny that you bring this point up about me. The very first NHL game I did at Pittsburgh, and it was it wasn't a great game from a Capitals perspective for whom I was calling the game. It was a 7-4 loss, but my first ever NHL game, Ovechkin had 2 goals. Malkin had 2 goals. Crosby had 1. I mean, I had the biggest names of that particular time, 2018, in the same game, all hitting the score sheet in my first time, full game, with an NHL headset mic on. And somebody online, you're curious, you wonder how fans accept you because John Walton is one of the best in the NHL, and he's their guy.
He is.
And people did not like it. They did not like me. They didn't like the fact that, yes, I called the goal for the Penguins, just as you described it. It wasn't the same as when Ovechkin scored, but it was exciting because in that case, you've got 17,000 people behind you going nuts, the horn going off. But after that, I learned to tone it down a little bit. I didn't know this original stay in the NHL was supposed to be 8 games while John was overseas calling TV games on NBC Sportsnet for women's hockey in the Olympics. But it turned into 23 over the span of 4 or 5 years. And I learned to dial it back a little bit to try and massage it. But it's hockey, man. I love it.
I know, but I worry about you because, when you're calling games for Cornell, there are some teams that you don't want to get too excited for on that other side because those Cornell Big Red fans, they're pretty passionate.
Well, the difference nowadays with that is, yes, Cornell cuts me a game check for each game I do, but it's ESPN Plus, so technically it is a neutral broadcast. Each school has what you would term a home-based broadcast crew. They don't travel, but they're there calling the game as a neutral party. So now I can crank it up, and I have to. And it's hard to do because there's maybe a group of parents from the visiting team, the only ones getting excited at line or rank. But I got to bring the same energy as if it was the 4,300 Cornell fans going home after an overtime winner. So that's I can be cut some slack nowadays for employing the style that pretty much I've had for about 35 years of my broadcast career.
Fair enough. Let's talk a little bit of nostalgia with the Binghamton Senators for a second. I know people will probably think I'm going to go right to 2011 in the Calder Cup Championship, but being the fact that Binghamton has this huge, great rivalry right now with the Danbury Hat-Tricks, maybe even the Blue Ridge Bobcats, and the upcoming opponent this upcoming weekend, the Port Huron Prowlers, I'd like to talk a little bit about the rivalry between Binghamton and the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. One of the nice things about Binghamton is they've always had pretty big rivalries with like Rochester, a little bit with Syracuse, Hershey for a little bit back in the late 70s. But realistically, Binghamton and Wilkes-Barre, the rivalry got so intense that even Wilkes-Barre's staff was involved in the rivalry. And you know who I'm talking about, of course. Fans were rocking the bus outside of the Visions Veterans Memorial Arena one time as we were leaving. The rivalry got pretty intense between Binghamton and Wilkes-Barre, didn't it?
Yeah, I talk about my excitement in calling a goal in hockey, whether it's for the team that's paying my way or the opposing team, but it's hockey, man. It's an emotional sport, and it's funny that you've brought up some different elements of my journey and how I got my start and recording mock broadcasts in the press box in Binghamton. Before Wilkes-Barre Scranton ever had their team, because they didn't come into the AHL until 98 or 99, I think it was.
99.
And that would be when I think that was kind of the tail end of the Rangers before they moved their affiliation to Hartford. But
Rangers ended in 97 and went to Hartford.
Ah, okay. I told you I've forgotten more than I remember nowadays. But what I do remember is before Wilkes-Barre had their team, they had a couple of guys that, much like myself, they came up and did mock broadcasts. They were from the Wilkes-Barre Scranton area, and I don't know whether I never chatted with them, but I just knew through somebody what they were doing. And they were coming up and broadcasting Binghamton hockey games against whoever they were playing. They may have been replaying them on the air just to kind of get a little juice going. And I forget at what point that was in the development of that franchise and where their arena was as far as construction-wise and everything. But I think it was well before that. So this may have been pre-Rangers leaving. I want to say it was probably in the early to mid-'90s. So they were still trying to be part of the campaign to get a team there. But, they had a horrible first season, if memory serves. I think they only won like 14 or 16 games. But it didn't take them long to develop into a pretty good powerhouse in the Northeast. Yeah. And they were selling out every game, every night. And that'll just tick you off if you're a team. And, Binghamton was even newer than Wilkes-Barre Scranton. But Binghamton had the pedigree of hockey in town by that point, probably for 25-ish years. And back in the AHL, Binghamton fans kind of puffed their chest out. Well, we know what we're talking about. All those fans down in Wilkes-Barre Scranton, they support the team, but they don't know hockey. Yeah, it's typical trash talk between fans. And, then on the ice, I can't pick out any specific moments as far as sparking the rivalry. Obviously, you had that, I don't know if I want to call it a collapse in the spring of 05, but 04-05, and Cornell had the 2 games done on the lead in the first round of the playoffs, won both games on home ice against Wilkes-Barre Scranton, lost a triple overtime game in Game 3 on Monday night into Tuesday morning, and that was the beginning of the end.
You remember who scored the goal?
God, don't tell me. I think he's on the Sportsnet panel now. Colby Armstrong? Is that who scored it?
Very good, yes.
So I did remember
Kim and I were there. Kim and I were there at the game, the triple overtime game. So
that was year 3, I guess. So I guess that was early on, and that was a little bit of an impetus to really start stoking the flames. And Syracuse, Wilkes-Barre, they're about the same distance from Binghamton. Proximity plays into it. Their fans come to our bar, and our fans go down there. There's just a lot of neat things in the world of hockey and the sport, the passionate element of the sport. Not just the players, not just the fans, not just the front office people, and the broadcasters sometimes too. So it's that played into a lot of it.
Yeah, Tom Grace played into it a lot as well. I think even more so than you did, as he was making comments on the air, even while being in our arena, talking about the banners in the stands that he portrayed as the losing history of Binghamton hockey. So it was intense. It was intense. I think there was the Harry Dumas game where, or Harry Dumbass, as a lot of people used to like to call him back in the day. He got fired after having just a crazy game. I don't remember if it was in the playoffs or at the end of the season. I know I wasn't at the game. But I was told about the game, and there was a ton of penalty minutes, well over 200 penalty minutes, and he eventually got fired from the AHL, because of how bad he refereed. But one of the games was, a Wilkes-Barre Binghamton game.
Yeah, and that's another element too. Not so much of the rivalries, but the officials and the personalities back in the day, and they can stoke the fans' passions as well, be it good or bad, whether they're calling a lot of penalties and they're going your way and you're getting some power plays, or you feel like you're getting screwed over and every call is going against us and the team is diving, the other team is going down easy. It's there's a lot of different elements within a rivalry, and the officials can sometimes unknowingly play into that, and it just kind of amps the heat up on both sides of the ledger, no matter who the teams are. But I think when it's a team you see so frequently, as was the case with Wilkes-Barre Scranton, you saw them probably anywhere between 8 and 10 times a year, which that's kind of a reserved amount nowadays when you talk about the team you cover now. I remember when Elmira had been in the league through various entities in the FPHL, and I think Binghamton would probably pay them 15 to 20 times a season, including preseason games, and that's a bit too much. I think sometimes maybe, and you could better answer to that, the rivalry becomes not so much a rivalry, it becomes very boring. You want to have a little variety, as they say, is the spice of life. But those AHL rivalries, I think probably 8 to 10 games maybe was a little bit too much. If it was 6 to 8, you have a little bit more spice. You kind of circle those games on the calendar. But it was great back in the day. And I think, You mentioned Syracuse as well. Rochester. I think Rochester, the rivalry was really not so much the Senators. It could have been at times, but not during my broadcast career.
It was Whalers and Rangers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And going back, not so much a geographical rival, but those good teams in the mid to late 80s out of the Baltimore, Maryland area with the Baltimore Skipjacks. They just hated them. They were a mean, dirty team, man. Man, were they good. You hated them. You loved it when they came in because you could just let all your negativity out, but they were a good team, and that's hard to swallow when maybe you're not quite as good as they are.
Before we talk about 2011, I have to ask you this question, and if it sounds like I'm calling you out, I don't mean to be. Did you ever make up with Jan Hebert?
No. I don't think I ever even spoke to him directly. I spoke to him a lot on the air, or maybe during a commercial break.
Oh, yeah, you did.
Yeah.
No, well, okay. There was one time that we didn't go to commercial break, and he was skating off the ice, and you were supposed to be going to commercial break, and you were yelling at him. It was crazy how much you love that man.
Oh, that I know. That was up at the Glens Falls Civic Center, now Cool and Sharing Arena in Glens Falls. I remember it, and I thought I had thrown to a commercial break, so... Oh, boy, I'm going to have a chat with Dave Losey, or maybe trying to think of Bill Snelson was one of my guys on the board. And you know what? It was Bill. Guys. Bill, I remember Bill laughing. He just started chuckling because he maybe forgot to pop me down and hit the brake because he didn't realize that was me. He thought it was a fan in the background because I took my headset off because Jean Hebert just made a complete mess of a first period up there, putting guys in the penalty box that weren't even on the ice, giving penalties that to non-existent players. It was just, and the beautiful part about it was the little gondola where I broadcast from up in Adirondack, the officials come on and off the ice right underneath that gondola. So he may have heard what I was saying, but officials are kind of trained not to pay much attention to the fans, so I didn't even get a look up, but I'm pretty sure he heard me because I was projecting quite well that night.
Yeah, well, there was also a time in Binghamton when you did the same thing, and I was standing right next to you in 2012. So, you know,
have a history
as the color commentator and not knowing what to say, and then Kate is tugging on my arm to try to stop you because you were so upset with them. And I think that was probably the only guy that you were really ever upset with because we had some pretty decent referees back then. At least I felt so. There were some guys that didn't want to call, like Wes McCauley. We called him Wes, no call McCauley. I don't know if he's still that way today in the NHL, but he was definitely one of those guys who didn't, he had a hot date. I think that's something that you said all the time. Well, he must have a hot date tonight.
That was Jeff Smith. Smith.
Yes.
Smitty would go through a game, and you'd look every game that he would do. If he called, I don't know what the workload for AHL referees were back in the day. Say he called 50 games, 48 of the 50 would be penalty free. It was hilarious. You'd be in and out in 2 hours and 15 minutes if you had number 49 in stripes calling the game for you.
No, absolutely. And Jeff Smith is the guy who changed his flight and saved his life.
Yes. Yeah, it was actually the desk agent that suggested it. They knew that the bad weather was going to be around Buffalo, and the gate agent actually suggested a change because he had, I think it was 2 small children and his wife at that time. They changed out, and, if you followed that, the rest is history. A smaller plane that went down just outside of Buffalo that he was supposed to be on, and talked to him about that. I've not interviewed any referees other than Mr. Smith, and that was kind of one of the big portions of the conversation, and I did bring up the fact of penalties, and he goes, people are here to watch hockey, and they're not here to watch me call penalties, so I give them what they want. You make sure the guys are playing within the boundaries of the rules, maybe let a couple of things slide, and we get in and out. So it was a good conversation. I remember chatting with him, and seemed like a good guy, and I will not say that about many officials.
For the Black Bears fans, I do want to talk about May 10th of 2024 because you were there in attendance, and I really want to get your thoughts on air about that. But let's talk about 2011 first because it was a season that started off with Coach Kurt Kleinendorf coming in. He just won a championship in amateur hockey. Getting the U.S. national team to win a championship. And what's very interesting, he comes in and he is a smooth talker. He's he's better than a car salesman. He was just a great talker, a great communicator is probably the best way to phrase it. And we had Barry Brust and a young Robin Leonard. And, he started making decisions outside of Ottawa's confines saying, listen, well, I'm going to play this guy because this guy is going to win us games. And he worked really well with the players that we had. And he was great with the media. But the team didn't have that great of probably the first 60% of the season. And then there was a trade that brought in, I believe, Ryan Platolny from Chicago or from Rockford. And things started to just change and click. What do you remember about the first part of that season?
Well, I think about it, and you brought up Kurt's name, and Kurt is a pro's pro. I think that's how I would put it. And for a first-year coach, certainly not a first-year. I'm trying to think. Maybe it was his first year in the AHL. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back. I know he coached in the ECHL. But coming in, it seemed like he was wise and experienced beyond his years. And I think that was a steadying influence. You need that, especially with a bit of a younger team coming into the season and trying to get everybody to gel. And most years you can say that about teams in the AHL. It's the top developmental league. So you're looking for that next wave of players that you can eventually develop over several years and then have whoever remains. Nowadays, if you're not doing something, you get traded away after half a season or a season. But if you invest in a guy and you bring him up to the system, eventually the goal is to have him be a contributor at the NHL level when you put all those resources behind somebody or a group of players. And I think he was, hindsight's always easy. It's always 20/20. You can look back and at the end of it, they win the championship and you can say, oh, he was the right man for the job or he was the perfect guy for this situation. But you don't know. You're going into the season, coming into town in September. I remember meeting him over at Tully's. He brought another veteran coach in with him, Steve Sterling, and by this time Sterling had been behind the bench of an NHL team. He was a head coach of the New York Islanders, and that didn't work out long term. But you put those two personalities together, that was such a wonderful base to then have the players have as a resource. Kurt making the decisions he was making. He, as you know, and for those that don't know him or maybe have experienced him and had opportunity to interact with him, one of the most congenial men around. But he coached and, he ran the ship with a stiff hand. It was going to be his way.
Yes.
And if you didn't like it, well, maybe we need to find somewhere else for you, be it on the bench, not travel with the team, or maybe with another organization. And he was the right man for the job. And I think, not that Binghamton was in any position to, they hadn't made the playoffs, I think, at that point, 4 straight seasons, perhaps.
Five years.
So there you go. So it had been a while. Yeah. But so the pressure to make the playoffs, I don't know if that was there, but the pressure to show improvement, develop some players, and have Ottawa look down here and know they can rely on some call-ups. And when all was said and done, I think it was a bit of a struggle for Binghamton to nail down that final playoff spot in the East Division, which they did so as a crossover. They finished 5th in the East, but they had more points than the 4th-place finisher over in the Atlantic Division. To get to that point, Ottawa had called up a lot of players that had made an impact in Binghamton, and they had to do a little bit of a scramble. I think they clinched their playoff berth, I want to say in the 3rd to last game. I remember it being a Wednesday night at home against Norfolk, and they needed, the magic number was 1 point, and they got that game into overtime against Norfolk. They got their point, and the game wasn't over when regulation was done, but the crowd that was there, there was a little murmur and then the applause rising up because they realized that was the point we needed. We're going to the playoffs this year.
Yeah.
And, then it started to build. Didn't start off great against Manchester in the first round, but once that series got deeper, Ottawa's season finished up top in the NHL. Then the reinforcements came, and that really turned things around. But kind of spinning it back to Kurt Kleinendorf, he's a guy that could take the raw rookie or maybe that first or second year player, kind of lay the foundation for what it takes to be a pro. And then you mentioned Ryan Platolny coming in. He was a veteran player at that point, although not, veteran in hockey nowadays is 26, 27 years old. I can still picture his face. I don't think he was very old, but yet you could call him a vet. And I think we had seen him pass through town prior to his time in the Chicago Blackhawks organization. He was with the Flyers / Phantoms. And he could take the older players, a Ryan Keller who had been around the block a little bit. And those players knew how to carry themselves, a little bit of seasoning from the coaching staff of Klein and Dorst and Sterling. The goaltending, the older vet, Barry Brust, he had been there and done that. Probably his best days were with the Manchester Monarchs. And Robin Leonard, the fresh-faced rookie. And what a tandem that became in the playoffs. And Barry kind of dragged the team into battle into the playoffs. And when he was a bit broken down, he had been battling some injuries. And I think, as we all know, Barry, he wasn't, the most in-shape guy around, but he did have skill, so he played well. But he went as far as he could with battling a few different injuries, and then once he was done, he had one final hurrah with a great relief appearance against Charlotte, I think in Game 1 of the conference finals. And then Robin Leonard came in and took over. There was just so many pieces to that team that was incredible. And I think they had the perfect tandem to coach those guys to the ultimate goal, which they ended up attaining. It's you can dig so much deeper and peel so many layers back on that onion, but it was just a perfect confluence of coaches, players, trades, young guys, veterans, everybody putting it together. At the end, you're lifting the cup in Houston on a hot, steamy night in June.
It's amazing too, because when we do talk about what Kirk did to make decisions, Mark Borowiecki only played 9 games in the regular season. He had no points. It's 6 penalty minutes, yet he goes and plays in 21 of the 23 playoff games. It was decisions like that, and then Boro was blocking shots and doing things almost like if he was a vet and he was a rookie. It's crazy how that went. And also, you talk about some of the great players that are on there. Andre Benoit, what a solid defenseman, just was the perfect fit in that Binghamton team that season to help them win.
Tough as nails, but a bit undersized, but what a great offensive touch as well. I forget how many points he had that season or even in the playoffs. But he was an offensive producer, but not this big, rough and tough guy. I'm trying to think of somebody that's come up through the years now in the NHL, not in Binghamton, but even a Borowiecki, but like a Robert Bortuzzo when he played down in the AHL and then made his name with the St. Louis Blues, among other teams. Kind of had that physical stature. Benoit didn't have that, but he could send you into the first couple of rows of seats on occasion, but just such a solid defender, could bring that physical play every so often, and he was contributing a lot from the blue line. It was funny. That season was kind of one of the first seasons, if not the very first, they started attempting to track time on ice, and it was one of the games late in the playoff season, if not the finals itself. It was on the road. And you get the sheets after the game, and it says Andre Benoit, he was on the ice for some ridiculous amount, 3 minutes and 27 seconds of a playoff game that late in what turned out to be a championship run. He was playing 35 minutes a night. How somehow, some way that got screwed up and not recorded correctly, I don't know. But there was not, he had to have been out there every other shift. That's how much they relied on a player like that, not only for the contributions on the score sheet, but for his leadership. He wore the C for a reason, and he was outstanding. There were so many different personalities on that team and levels of play. Like I said, younger guys, veteran guys, the coaching staff, the goaltending tandem. You can just kind of pick through it. The group of guys that Ottawa sent down once their season was over. You had Zach Smith come down, Colin Greening. I mean, those were guys that spent extended time in the NHL with Ottawa that year. And they came back fully seasoned for this AHL best part of the year. And I remember talking with Mark Morris, who was the head coach of Manchester, because that's when those send-downs happened. Binghamton was mounting their comeback in the first round against the Monarchs after going down 3-1. And he and I would sit and talk. He coached Clarkson during my radio days and my first stint as a broadcaster, so I'd known him a little bit. And he and I would sit at center ice up at the Verizon Wireless Arena and just chit-chat. And he'd just shake his head. He goes, I can't believe all these bodies you guys got back. You guys are going to take it to us. And I'm like, Coach, the series is 3-2. We got to win, tonight here, and we got to win tomorrow night if they're fortunate enough to win this one to tie the series at 3-3. And he goes, yeah. And as it turns out, it looked like Coach Morris knew exactly what he was talking about.
Well, Grady, it was such an interesting playoffs series for me because I obviously called 3 games with Manchester in the first round. And I remember at the end of the, was it the 5th game? I said on air to the Manchester fans, you have a 3-2 lead in this series. There's no way Binghamton is coming back. I'm speaking to the audience, right? That's what a pro does. That's what somebody who, and listen, let's be honest. I only started broadcasting games, with Ken in January of that year. And then boom, in April, I'm literally making this statement that, hey, listen, this is not going to happen. Binghamton's not going to come back. But then after that game was over with, I turned back into, Power Play Post Show, Bob, who is, basically going to cover it the rest of the way and be able to do the interviews, post-game scrums and things of that nature afterwards. But it was such a weird season for me because, and to talk a little bit about last year's championship team, I've now seen a Binghamton team win 2 championships, but I haven't been in the right position to be just a fan, to just enjoy it because I've done this, which is a blessing in its own self, but it's kind of crazy. For you as a Binghamton hockey fan as well, you enjoyed it differently than you probably ever thought you would because you were a broadcaster in 2011, but last year you showed up just as a Binghamton hockey fan.
Yeah, it was neat. Obviously the support that the Black Bears have gotten pretty much out of the gates, and it's culminated this year in averaging nearly 4,400 fans per game, and I think they had 4,400 for their one home playoff game last weekend against Watertown, and that speaks volumes right there about hockey in Binghamton. And you and I talked a little bit last night, and there are some snobs out there, and I can't sit here and tell you, even though I'm on a Binghamton hockey show, that if I lived closer to Binghamton and I wasn't involved with Cornell, I'd have season tickets or I'd go to 10 or 15 games a year. I can't tell you that. I'll be honest and upfront. But the people that love hockey in Binghamton, there's overlapping. There's the old school AHL people that have come out when the team was the BC Icemen, went to the UHL, and then the Senators came back, became the Devils. Then the AHL left again. The FPHL came in. There's those people that have followed predominantly AHL hockey, but they've supported all the teams that have been there. I would guess, I can't say, you could speak to this better than I could. I think the people, probably a good percentage of them, maybe more than half, I'd say, are maybe, I don't know if you call them new hockey fans, but they've taken to this level of hockey. They've taken to the Black Bears. You have the old guard that's been there, tried and true, thick and thin, through all the other franchises that they've seen in their lifetime. But I think it's a new base of fans being developed there. I'm an old school guy. Again, I don't know if I lived closer, I'd be there for 10, 15 games a year. But I felt, just from my regard, it's not going to sound right because it's not the right expression, but I'm just going to say, it was important for me to be there. Like you say, I was in the midst of that Calder Cup championship. I was working it. I always consider myself the fan that got the privilege to wear the headset and bring the action home to the listeners or the viewers. But this one was just, I could go as a fan, maybe see a few people that might remember me, which I did, but just sit back and relax and watch 4,800 fans bask in the glory of a championship won on home ice. And for those that don't recall or maybe don't have a history of the Binghamton Senators, they won that championship in 2011 on the road down at the Toyota Center in Houston, Texas. Now, a championship is a championship. You don't quibble on where you win them, but there's something special when you can do it in front of your own fans. And I knew I wanted to be a part of that. Not that I was crazy celebrating. I went out for a couple of beers afterwards with a couple of people I knew there. Then I just quietly went home. It wasn't my team per se, but it was my hometown. I didn't grow up in Binghamton, but close enough. I was the hometown guy that got to be the voice for 15 years, and I got to know some people in Binghamton and just wanted to see them enjoy the moment. And that's really why I felt I needed to be there, not for anybody else, just for myself. I wanted to see that, kind of be a little part of it, arm pumping every time they scored a goal. And at the end, seeing the countdown and the fans celebrating and a trophy brought out on the Visions Veterans Memorial Arena ice that was going to go to the home team. And that was a whole lot of fun last year. And got to tell you, got to feel they're going to do it again this year. I don't follow the league closely, but when you win 49 out of 56 games, you've got to have the odds pretty much stacked in your favor.
What's kind of funny, because when people ask me about the greatest year in Binghamton hockey, I always go to obviously 92-93. It was such a disappointment, but they won 57 games out of 80 games. It was a winning percentage of .775. And I say that is probably number two behind obviously winning the Cup in 2011, right? But then you take a look at the winning percentage of the Black Bears this year, which is .851, which is just a crazy number that nobody could fathom. And though you cannot compare, league to league, the different levels of hockey that have been played in Binghamton. I know the UHL had a few more guys go to the NHL. I know there were a couple people in the North American Hockey League that played in the NHL, then maybe finished their careers in the old North American Hockey League. And a couple guys who may have made it to the AHL from the North American Hockey League. So maybe that's a higher level than single A hockey like it is now. But you can look at the winning percentage and go, okay, these are pros that are getting paid. They travel on buses. They do all the same things as an ECHL team does, as an AHL team does. You can kind of look at the winning percentage and go, okay, that's pretty impressive at .851.
Yeah, and I think, you can talk about it being a little bit skewed. I think there are some pretty good markets down in the South, and they draw, and they have some pretty good facilities. And I'm thinking Athens, Georgia, brand new facility, if I'm not mistaken. They were an expansion team this year. But Binghamton, and you and I touched upon this last night in our off-air conversation, kind of setting up for tonight, that these guys in the FPHL, they're getting a pretty good venue. They're getting a really good facility. They have an outstanding fan base. So you roll a lot of things into that. A training facility, the gym that they had when the Binghamton Senators were there, when Ottawa kind of helped renovate that, and some money from Broome County as well.
It's still there.
It's a top-notch facility. Yeah, it may look a little bit old on the outside, but when you get inside and you see that place filled night in, night out with over 4,000 fans, the things you have at your fingertips to make you a better player, whatever you're bringing to the table at the single A level, where are free agents going to want to play? To me, Brant Sherwood and whoever else helps him make those decisions, they have a lot of recruiting tools, and they can be picky about who they bring in. You don't bring in just anybody when a lot of people, I'm sure, are clamoring to play in a facility for an organization that has proven itself to be one of the more desirable ones to be a part of in their very, very brief time in the FPHL. So I think it's fantastic what Andreas Johansson has been able to do in Binghamton, and it's only getting bigger, and it's only getting better, and it's only going to help. I don't want to say help Binghamton dominate even more. Certainly in their division it will. Those other teams I referenced, or in general, that the southern cluster, they have their amenities that they can draw with as well. But as far as up here, it's pretty lean as far as who has the facilities and the top-notch abilities to recruit players, in my eyes. You know this league much better than I do, but if I'm I'm playing single-A hockey, I want to do it in bingo.
No, you're absolutely right. 100%. I think Binghamton in the northern states, whether it's Port Huron, Fraser, Michigan, which I know is a suburb of Detroit, but again, it's not a facility that is set up like an old AHL barn is. You have Danbury, which is a very small, but a decent size rec rink, so to speak. They can get up to 2,500 fans there. And they've built a really good system there of having an all team, an NA3 team, and an NA3 HL team there. So they do okay there. I don't think they could probably recruit like Binghamton can. Like Brant Sherwood has the tools. First of all, his recruiting ability is just good. Just his natural hockey instinct of good players to bring in, character guys, understanding what the culture is, and then buying into that culture is very important to him. But at the same time, he can go, listen, this is where the Binghamton Senators won a championship. This is where the North American Hockey League played. And you remember that movie Slapshot that you watched? That's part of the legacy of coming here and playing in front of these fans, which is pretty cool. Grady, before I let you go, I wanted to ask you about some of your fellow broadcasters in the American Hockey League that you've broadcasted with. There's Owen Newkirk. There's Phil Gibaleo. Obviously, John Walton, who has been obviously a good, dear friend for you. Bob McGilligan. There's been so many great guys. I know Phil is with Quinnipiac now, which is great. John Walton's up in the NHL. And, of course, Bob McGilligan is up in the NHL. Can you talk about some of these broadcasters and what they've meant to you? Not necessarily helping your broadcast career. Of course, some of them have. But at the same time, just some of these friendships that you have with these guys.
It's a brotherhood.
It is.
As you're coming up, it's whether you're a player, a coach, athletic trainer, equipment guy, you're here, you're in the moment, but you look at it as a stepping stone. And, for whatever area of brotherhood you have, broadcasters being one, you're all going for the same jobs at the next level, but it's the camaraderie and the relationships. And kind of going back to a question probably about 45 minutes ago, talking about me doing mock broadcast in the press box. When the AHL teams would come through, I'd go up and introduce myself to the visiting broadcasters. And if they were amenable to it, I would be able to put on a headset if they had an extra headset with them and just watch them working with their gear, how they kept notes, what notes they used, and listen to them do games. And one of the biggest influences, I talked about Roger Neal. He did not do that. He was not broadcasting by the time I kind of started doing my thing.
Sure.
Pre-Cornell days, my first spin with Cornell. Don Stevens was with Rochester.
Oh, yes.
Don was there. His first season in Rochester was 86-87. They ended up winning the Calder Cup in Sherbrooke on a Sunday afternoon when all was said and done. Don Stevens is still there. So if you do that math, He is closing in on 40 years, I think the math would be, as the voice of the Rochester Americans. He was one of the most open guys of letting me hang out with him if there was room next to him in the press box. And he had big gear back in the day. He had an old Comrex unit that looked like you had to have a coffin to carry it around in. It was so big. But he was great. And you talk about full circle moments earlier with me starting at Cornell and now kind of winding down my broadcast career at Cornell. Don Stevens was with Rochester in Binghamton playing the Binghamton Devils the night that I was inducted into the Binghamton Hockey Hall of Fame. And I mentioned it during my speech that I couldn't be more pleased that he was here on this night because he really was one of the early guys that, kind of let me hang and kind of get a feel for what he did. And back then they were on a 50,000 watt radio station. There was no internet. There was no streaming. So I could pick up 1180 WHAM out of Rochester most nights on the radio. And I was a Binghamton hockey fan, but on the drive home from the arena, I was tuning in Don's post-game show or continuing on listening to him call the rest of an Amerks game. And he was one of the driving forces early in my broadcast career before I officially became a hockey broadcaster with Cornell. And then he was still there in 2002 when I was introduced as a voice of the Binghamton Senators and played Rochester in the preseason. Then we were up there the second weekend of the regular year, and just a great guy. And he has not changed. He's always kidded me. Donnie and I have a thing now. As Donnie has gotten older, he's become very, very casual. Rarely, unless the game is on TV in Rochester, you will never see Donnie wearing a suit and tie. And I'm bald. I shave my head. So our typical greeting is, hey, he says to me, sees me the first time he'll see me in the rink, whether it's in Binghamton or I'm walking in Rochester, hey, nice haircut. And I say to him right back, hey, nice suit. And we both have a chuckle and we're off and running. But he's a great guy. And I remember that first year when I was brought in as the announcer of Binghamton, and Bob McGilligan, you mentioned him. Now, the longtime radio voice of the Columbus Blue Jackets. He was still in Syracuse, the voice of the Crunch and the Sky Chiefs, or the Chiefs, whatever they were called back then in AAA baseball in Syracuse, and did a Saturday morning sports roundup type of a show. And I'm down at my church on a Saturday morning, and I had that playing in my earbuds, and the schedule had just come out for the American Hockey League, and I had not met Bob yet. And he's running down the schedule, and he says, and then the Crunch open. He has this very WWE persona about him and everything he did, how he broadcasted. I think he's maybe mellowed a touch in the NHL, but he is a classic personality. And he said, and then the Crunch have their home opener against the soon-to-be-hated Binghamton Senators. I'm just laughing at this character. So we went up there, and I was the voice of the soon-to-be-hated Binghamton Senators, and Bobby and I hit it off. We've been friends to this very day. But he warned me. He goes, oh, you're going to hate going to Rochester. I go, why is that? He goes, oh, the fans are brutal. They're brutal. And I had to go to Rochester the next weekend. So in Rochester, it's not quite like Binghamton, but you're kind of in the fans from where you broadcast from up there.
Yes.
And he said, the fans are brutal. They'll be all over you, this and that. And I got done doing the game, getting ready to do the post-game show. I hadn't been harassed all game long, and there's this person standing off to the right of me. And I went to break, and I just kind of glanced over, and I said, hey, how's it going? And I said, good. It was a guy. And he goes, I just wanted to tell you. And I'm like, oh, boy, here it comes. I sat here all night. I really enjoyed listening to your broadcast. I'm like, well, thank you. That is not what I was expecting. And I didn't tell him why, but I just said that. And then I told Don when he came down to Binghamton a week or so later, and he goes, well, yeah, you know why Bob McGilligut's telling you that Rochester fans suck? He sits here and antagonizes them for 2.5 hours. You don't do that.
That's awesome.
But the characters, the relationships, you mentioned Phil. I still see Phil at least once a year. He's the rinkside reporter currently for the ESPN Plus broadcast up at Lake Placid for the ECAC tournament championships. John Walton, we chit-chat. The interactions aren't as frequent nowadays. And wow, what a season for him, getting to call the record-breaking goal for Alexander Ovechkin. He was there for a lot of the goals. I forget when John got the call-up from the Hershey Bears, but, you know, Ovi had been around for a few years, but he has had a hand.
Late 2000s?
Yeah, I
think the late 2000s.
He's had a hand in a ton of those calls. And, you know, I mentioned a couple of times, I've had 23 games as the voice of the Capitals. And invariably, whenever I put that headset on for the Capitals, Ovi seemed to find the back of the net. In 23 games, I've called 2 hat tricks, along with multiple games with single goals or a couple of goals. 23 games. I'd probably say, I could give you an accurate number, but I can't do the quick research. I'd probably say I've called a dozen of those 896 or 97 goals, whatever he has now. So that's cool. my little claim to fame in the Alexander Ovechkin goal-scoring record over Wayne Gretzky.
You mentioned Don Stevens, and I when I got to meet Don Stevens going up, making trips up to Rochester, he was great. The person that I absolutely 100% loved up there was Kevin Klubsha. Kevin O.
Talk about characters.
He and I would sit there and just tell stories in the press box. And I think there was one game, I think it was Syracuse against Rochester, and I don't think we watched much of the second period because we were just telling old stories about the Binghamton Rangers and the Rochester Americans, and it was just fun just to hear him talk about certain games. Grady, before I let you go, because of episode number 1, I have gotten to do some really amazing things in broadcasting or within the American Hockey League, from being able to go to all-star games and kind of grill Dave Andrews during the media sessions that we used to, the state of the league addresses that we used to have there with him, all the all-star games that I got to do, and, you know, getting to call games with you and obviously Ken Kale. And I called a game with Pete Mishu once, which was so awesome. And he's such an awesome dude as well. And I got to do some really, really cool things. And to be honest, Roger Neal, one of my great heroes. I listened to, Binghamton Whaler days in the early days when I was 12, 13 years old. Loved the way he did games. Loved the way you did games. But if it wasn't for you, as a part of all the other attributes that I probably brought to being able to do all those things that I got to do, plus obviously calling the last Thanksgiving Day game with you, which was amazing, awesome for me. Not necessarily awesome for other people, but awesome for me for sure. I really do just got to say thank you, because I wouldn't be here at 500 episodes if it wasn't for some of the contributions that you did and you gave to me. So not only a guy like Rob Lapolis, who you helped really, start his career, you really did help me get to this point as well. Maybe even more so, probably had to give me more stuff, more juice out of you than you did to Rob. But I really do appreciate it.
Well, I don't know what to say to that, Bob, because I think you never know. You could be in the same spot you are today without any help from me. But I think that's part of, you mentioned my relationship with the broadcasters that I came up through the AHL with and maintain friendships with nowadays. It's relationships. And if you can help somebody, you try to. And you hope it's help that does provide them with something that opens a door, that gives them an opportunity here, gives them a chance there. And I guess the phrase, maybe it could be overused, but you pay it forward. Someone had to open the door for me. That was Bob Arablo, and he gave me a chance to sit in the press box, record mock broadcasts, and then a friend of mine whom I played softball with that ended up heading up the Cornell broadcast department back in the day, Michael Veely. Maybe I wasn't the most talented guy around, and I think I had some talent, but you have relationships, and those can sometimes make up for a little bit of lack of skills. And I'm not saying you had a lack of skills. I'm just saying in my personal situation, you develop those relationships, you open doors, and then you don't want to let those people down that maybe open those doors and give you a little bit of a foothold. And you take what you do, you put your passion, you pour yourself into it like I know you have over the last 21 years, and you're at where you're at for a reason. So I'm glad. To me, I have been such a very small part in what has really become, on the minor league hockey scene, a behemoth of an outlet, the Power Play Post Show. And your passion has not been denied. You continue to make it bigger and better, and even more important nowadays, because we talked about it early in our conversation. The local media really isn't such that it gives the fans what they want anymore. Social media can do it, but if a team doesn't have a really good social media department and, lower level minor league hockey, they're going to have a guy doing it that he's also doing probably 3, 4, 9 other things for the organization, because those staffs aren't very big. So what you do is important. You've been passionate about it for these 21 years, ever since show number 1. Here you sit at 500. So, pat yourself on the back. I maybe gave you a little bit, but you took it all and you ran with it to where you sit today.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm excited for the next couple of weeks to see how the Binghamton Black Bears do. I do have a very special interview that I'm going to be doing probably within the next week or two with a Calder Cup champion from the 2011 team. Last year it was Cody Bass as we went into the finals for the Binghamton Black Bears. This year it is a goaltender. I have not announced which goaltender from the Calder Cup championship team will be on, but that will be announced very soon. I've already had conversations with that goaltender. It's going to be exciting. Grady, thank you very much for doing episode 500 with me. Hopefully, if I ever get to 1,000, you and I are still coherent enough to maybe do this one more time.
We may be in wheelchairs, but I'm in.
I might be on oxygen, so I might have to type out the questions for somebody to ask you. So
I'll be there, man. If you bank another $4.99, I'll be there for that one that hits the 1K mark. I'm in, buddy.
Perfect. Awesome. He is Grady Whittenburg, the voice of the Cornell Big Red men's and women's hockey team. He does that on ESPN Plus, which I think is so very cool. He called Washington Capitals games. Alexander Ovechkin wouldn't be anywhere without Grady Whittenburg. Let's be perfectly honest. And of course, he is the voice of the Binghamton Senators. He is Grady Whittenburg. I'm Bob Howard. This has been the 500th edition of the Power Play Post Show. Thank you for listening. We'll have another show in just a couple of days as we preview the Port Huron Prowlers and Binghamton Black Bears second round matchup right here on the Power Play Post Show.
Thanks for listening to this edition of the Power Play Post Show. Be sure to tune in next week to the Box Studios Radio Network for all the latest Black Bears news and interviews from around minor league hockey. The Power Play Post Show would like to thank John Patitucci for all the music you hear on the show. You've been listening to the Power Play Post Show.